A year after surviving a traumatic car accident, a newly hired security guard begins to see the vengeful spirit of a woman in the mirrors of a department store. During a session with his therapist, Dr. Beaumont, Max recounts the car accident from a year ago that resulted in the death of his fiancée, Kayla. The man admits that he still blames himself for what happened because he was driving. He then adds that since the accident, he has started seeing things that aren't real, but insists that he's not crazy. The doctor suggests that after 2 months of daily sessions, Max might be ready to let go of his misplaced guilt and stop blaming himself for the accident. However, the man responds that if he forgives himself, there will be no one left to blame. He then confesses that he's reached the point where, when he looks in the mirror, he no longer knows what's real. One night, at the soon-to-be-opened Mayflower department store, Henry, the security guard, makes his usual rounds through the empty building. In the lobby, the man removes the paper covering a large mirror and admires his reflection. Suddenly, he sees the image move on its own, leaving him bewildered. Then, the reflection drops his flashlight, picks up the broken glass shards from the floor, and puts them in its mouth. Confused and terrified, Henry feels the sharp pain of the glass in his mouth and throat as the reflection stares at him menacingly and chews. The security guard suffers the same injuries as his reflection, and blood spills from his mouth, causing him to collapse on the floor in intense agony. A week later, Max receives a call from his father, Jack, the owner of the department store. He tells his son that due to the disappearance of a woman 2 months ago and the fact that the security guard went mad, cut himself, and quit, they might not be able to open the store on time. So, Jack asks Max if he would like to take the job as a night watchman because it might help distract him. His son accepts the offer and thanks his father for the opportunity. That afternoon, Max sees Elizabeth struggling as she tries to put up a missing person flyer on a lamppost, and he offers to help her. At the department store, Jack introduces his son to Keller, the store manager, Jenna, the store's head buyer, and Ryan, vice president of operations. Before everyone heads off to their tasks, the father tells his son to contact Ryan if he encounters any problems during his rounds. In the break room, Max clocks in to start his shift and then pours himself a cup of coffee in front of the mirror. However, when he looks at his reflection again, he is startled to see the ghostly image of a woman. The man recoils in fear, but when other employees enter the room and ask if he's alright, he tries to play it off and leaves. The next day, Dr. Beaumont asks if he had taken any substances before the episode the previous night, and he says no. When he shares that the woman in the reflection looked like a corpse, the doctor suggests that it may have reminded him of Kayla and that it was his mind's way of processing the emotional impact. The man wonders if he needs to be hospitalized, but the therapist says that actually implies the opposite, as these episodes mean he's ready to let go of the guilt. She adds that now that he's no longer abusing substances and alcohol, he's prepared to process the tragedy seriously. That night, Jenna enters her bedroom, talking animatedly with someone on the phone, unaware of her eerie reflection staring at her from the mirror. Meanwhile, Max logs into the computer in the security room and clicks on Henry's personal files folder. Inside, he finds videos recorded by a hidden camera in the women's bathroom. Suddenly, Keller appears, causing the security guard to quickly close the video. Concurrently, Jenna undresses and gets into the shower. Later, Max makes his rounds and arrives at the lobby, where he takes his medication. Seconds later, he sees Jenna's naked reflection in the large mirror. He then watches in horror as the woman places her hands on the sides of her face and effortlessly removes her head. Meanwhile, Jenna steps out of the shower and cuts her leg with a razor. She grabs a tissue from the drawer in front of the mirror and wipes the wound. However, when she looks back, her reflection crashes into the mirror, startling her. Horrified, the woman falls against the glass partition, shattering it, and collapses onto the shards. Jenna tries to slowly move her body out of the shower, but a broken piece of glass falls on her neck, decapitating her. The next day, immediately after his shift, Max calls Dr. Beaumont's office to schedule an appointment. Meanwhile, detectives Houston and Piccirilli investigate Jenna's gruesome death and find her work ID. After the session with the therapist, the security guard asks if everything he's been seeing in the mirrors is normal, and she responds that it is. She then explains that no one sees in mirrors something that isn't already a part of themselves, not even the things they think they are seeing. She mentions that different cultures have myths about mirrors, such as the Korean belief that a person's soul can get trapped inside a mirror when it leaves the body. That afternoon, Max sees a handprint on the glass, but when he checks inside the room, there's no one on the other side. He returns outside, and suddenly, the ghost of the woman appears in a reflection. Seconds later, Ryan taps him on the shoulder and delivers the tragic news about Jenna. Upon hearing how she died, Max realizes that her injuries are the same ones he saw in the mirror the previous night. That night, Max stands in front of the lobby mirror and tries to summon the ghost again, but nothing happens. Meanwhile, Ryan uses the apartment elevator, but he's too busy checking his emails to notice that his reflection is staring at him. At the department store, the security guard wanders through the storage area and, through an antique mirror, sees Ryan groaning in agony as he holds his intestines spilling from his open stomach. In the apartment, Ryan carries a knife and his cooked dinner to the living room. However, when he notices his reflection is missing from the mirror, he drops the tray to the floor. Seconds later, his reflection reappears, and he watches as the image crouches down and cuts his Achilles tendon with the blade. Even though it's only the reflection performing the action, Ryan feels the agonizing pain of the wound and collapses to the floor, unable to use his legs. Meanwhile, Max searches through employee files to find Ryan's information and call him to warn him. Concurrently, Ryan drags his body across the floor, trying to reach the phone, but before he can, the reflection slashes its stomach, and the man can do nothing but writhe in pain as an identical cut appears on his torso. Later, the detectives realize that Ryan is the third Mayflower employee involved in a strange incident, along with Jenna and the woman who disappeared 2 months ago. They then spot an anxious Max lingering outside the building and notice that he's also a department store employee due to his ID. Minutes later, Max calls his father to tell him he's quitting the job because he's seeing things again. His understanding father says he doesn't care if Max quits, because the only thing that matters is that he's okay. After the call, the security guard looks into a puddle and sees his father with cuts all over his face, screaming in fear. Worried that this might be a vision of future events, he heads to Jack's house. Meanwhile, his father takes a pizza out of the fridge and heats it up in the microwave, unaware that his reflection is staring at him. As the son runs as fast as he can to the house, the reflection grabs the pizza cutter and runs it across its face, causing Jack to touch his own face due to a sudden pain. Fortunately, the security guard arrives just in time, and his father's reflection glares at him disdainfully for thwarting its plans. Jack wonders why his son came to visit him in the middle of the night, so, as an excuse, Max says he's there to tell him he's changed his mind and would like to keep the job. When he returns to work, the detectives approach him at the entrance to ask him some questions. They explain that there have been 2 Mayflower employee deaths this week, and they find it suspicious that he was outside Ryan's apartment building tonight. Max asks if he's a suspect, and the police condescendingly tell him he's not, but it's a strange coincidence that he was there tonight and also happens to be the head of security at the department store. So, the security guard explains that, according to store protocol, he's required to contact Ryan about any issues because he's the vice president of operations. When Detective Houston asks why he didn't just call the man, Max says they can check the phone records and they'll see that he did call, and when no one answered, he decided to go there in person. He adds that the time of the call should be around the same time the alleged murder occurred, clearing him of any blame. Before leaving, the police emphasize that, although he's currently not a suspect, they'll be keeping an eye on him in the future. In the lobby, Max asks the spirit who she is and what she wants from him. Suddenly, his reflection turns on the flashlight, so he follows the beam to the ID of an employee named Eleanor, the woman he's been seeing in the mirror. Then, the light shines outside, and the security guard follows it to Eleanor's missing person flyer on the lamppost. He calls the number on the flyer and arranges a meeting with Eleanor's sister, Elizabeth, for tomorrow. The next day, he tries to explain to her that he sees her sister in the mirrors at Mayflower, but she thinks he's playing a cruel joke. However, he acknowledges that what he's saying sounds crazy but swears he's telling the truth. Later, Elizabeth asks why he's the only one out of all the employees who can see Eleanor. Then, the security guard recounts what happened a year ago. While driving on a rainy night, he asked Kayla to move to the back seat to get something from her backpack. She unbuckled her seatbelt and did as he asked, taking out the engagement ring box that he had wanted her to find. Delighted, she put the ring on her finger, but seconds later, a drunk driver crashed into their car. Since she wasn't wearing her seatbelt, she was thrown through the windshield, while Max remained strapped in his seat, and the airbag protected him from debilitating injuries. Kayla died instantly, and technically, so did he. However, the paramedics managed to get him to the ambulance in time and defibrillated him back to life. Max believes that the near-death experience gave him the ability to see the other side. He asks Elizabeth how long Eleanor has been missing, and when she says 2 months, he wonders if she believes her sister is still alive. The woman reveals that on the night her sister disappeared, she woke up screaming and knew at that moment that Eleanor had died. She says the police told her that her sister had probably left town to start a new life, but she knows Eleanor would never do that because they are best friends. Max asks what Eleanor was doing that night, and the woman replies that she was at the Mayflower for a celebration party for her recent hiring. Before parting ways, the security guard promises to call Elizabeth if anything comes up. Later, Max sees Eleanor in the bathroom mirror and begs her to tell him what she wants him to do. However, instead of responding, the woman grabs the scissors from the sink and uses them to stab her eyes. Suddenly, the man wakes up and realizes it was all a nightmare. That night, he calls Elizabeth to ask her for the exact date of her sister's disappearance. However, when he searches the security footage from September 22nd on the computer, he sees that someone has deleted the file. He checks who the last person was to view the video and discovers it was his predecessor, Henry, on September 24th. Later, the pair heads to Henry's house to talk to him. At first, the scarred man refuses to let them in, so Max forces his way through. Throughout the house, the paranoid man covers any reflective surface with cloths and towels. He deduces that Max can also see Eleanor now and claims that she wants to kill him. When the security guard asks why he deleted the files, Henry finally admits that Keller threatened to fire him if he didn't. He adds that the boss took him to the basement to delete the files, and he simply followed orders. Convinced that what they are looking for is in the basement, Max and Elizabeth return to the car to head back to the department store. Later, in the basement, they find an access space behind a recently moved boiler. Meanwhile, someone is watching them from the security room, and that person leaves to follow them. As Max ventures into the access space, Elizabeth stays behind, but unbeknownst to her, someone is hiding behind her. Suddenly, Keller grabs the woman and threatens to shoot her if she makes any noise. He then ties her wrists to a heavy shelf with duct tape. Moments later, Elizabeth manages to free herself, and before escaping, she warns Max that Keller has a gun. Torn, the armed man shoots at the security guard, but he dodges the bullets. However, he stumbles around a corner and finds Eleanor's lifeless body. 2 months ago, at the party, Jenna and Ryan set their sights on the new employee and planned to put a substance in her drink to embarrass her in front of their bosses. Later, while the man distracted Eleanor, the woman poured the substance into a drink and then offered it to the unsuspecting employee. In the present, Keller pursues Elizabeth and manages to grab her on the staircase. When she looks at her reflection in the mirror, she sees Eleanor instead of her sister. 2 months ago, Keller sees the drunken employee and offers to take her home. However, he takes her to a deserted part of the building and takes advantage of the situation with Eleanor. She wakes up in the middle of the deplorable act and pushes him away. The woman manages to escape the vehicle, but the man continues to chase her. In the present, Keller takes Elizabeth to the lobby, but he sees the ghost in the mirror. 2 months ago, the unstable man cornered the employee in the basement and strangled her. In her final moments, she reached out toward a nearby mirror, and it began to crack. However, when she finally died, the cracks disappeared as if nothing had happened, suggesting that the woman's soul transferred to the world of the mirror. In the present, Keller tries to strangle Elizabeth, but Max appears just in time to save her. As the two men struggle, the security guard sees Eleanor in the mirror. He then pushes Keller toward the object, allowing the vengeful ghost to grab him and take him to her dimension, where she proceeds to kill him. The mirror shatters, and Max and Elizabeth, relieved, embrace each other. Meanwhile, at the police station, Henry confesses to helping Keller move the boiler to cover the access space and that he also deleted the video files. The detectives then ask if he is willing to sign a confession regarding his role in the conspiracy to cover up Eleanor's murder, and he nods. After the police leave, the one-way mirror begins to crack, so Henry walks calmly toward it and accepts his imminent death.